You're listening to IHC's podcast.
All right, folks. Well, welcome to the IHC podcast where culture meets community. I'm your host, Marissa Hemstreet from the Canyoncito Bands of Navajos. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the communications coordinator for the Indian Health Center of Santa Clara Valley, where we provide medical, dental, counseling, WIC, and prevention services to over 23,000 members, while specializing in the unique needs and care of American Indians and Alaska Natives. And today, I'm here with...
Hi, my name is Elizabeth, and I have she, her pronouns. I do not have any tribal affiliations. I recently moved to the Santa Clara County area to attend school at San Jose State University. I came from a small rural area close to the Oregon border. However, I do have family across the Hawaiian Islands as well. My mom moved here when she was 9 months pregnant with me and raised me here. However, going back and forth has definitely been a big part of who I am and the way that I interact with the world.
Awesome. Thank you. So today our topic is about advocacy. It's advocacy for survivors. So before we get started and dive into what can be a heavy topic, we want to provide a trigger warning. So before we begin this program today, we do want to provide a trigger warning that some details discussed may be emotionally difficult or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. If you're seeking help, please refer to the following resources for aid in the description of this program. Thank you so much for listening. In May, we focus on raising awareness for violence experienced by Indigenous people, especially women, girls, and Two-Spirit individuals. The movement, MMIP, is dedicated to ending this violence. The symbol of a red hand covering the mouth represents the silenced voices of missing relatives and the lack of attention from media and law enforcement. It signifies oppression faced by Native women who are now using the hashtag #NoMoreStolenSisters to advocate for change. As a result, Elizabeth, a survivor advocate for SA survivors and a justice studies major at San Jose State University, was invited to the IHC podcast to discuss how survivors of violence can advocate for themselves and others. All right. So I understand that you're a justice studies major at SJSU. Can you tell us a little bit about what that entails and how you got into that field of study?
Absolutely. So I currently have an associate's degree in the administration of justice. I received that in my hometown. However, when I started college, it looked a lot differently for me. So I graduated in 2020, which was the year infamously known for drive-through graduations and Zoom prom. So going into that, I was definitely very unsure as to what my future looked like, as well as the rest of the world. So going into it, I decided that I was going to study finance. Growing up, my mom put a lot of work into instilling the importance of academia in my life and, attaining a higher education. She, when I was born, as I mentioned, she moved at 9 months pregnant to choose where to raise me, very specifically to encourage that focus on education. She finished her bachelor's degree while pregnant and then her master's while I was a toddler to then become a teacher, even at some points being my own teacher at public school. So with that, I was very focused on, what is going to create the most sustainable lifestyle for me, not, anything to do with my passions or really having an idea of what I wanted to do. So through that first year of college, I was going into it at 17. I unfortunately got into a very abusive relationship. He was also an older man. And during that first year of college, everything changed for me. This was the first time in my life that I had ever failed a class, and I failed every single one for 2 semesters in a row. So in my mind, I really had no idea what my life could even look like beyond that point if I had failed my first year of college. So I was blessed with the opportunity to clear my college transcript and start all over again. I was freshly out of this relationship. Thankfully, I had made the choice to leave, and I thought, why not take a criminal justice class just for fun? I grew up watching a lot of Forensic Files and those sorts of things, and I was like, heck yeah, that sounds great. The first class was led by a retired local investigator, and everything just clicked for me right away. I didn't realize at the time that why it clicked is that I saw the person that I didn't have in that moment of, oh, there's a chance that I could be that person. And next thing you know, I'm full-time. I'm doing about 22 units a semester. I cranked out my associate's degree in the administration of justice, and I was able to do a lot of very cool things during that time. So I started working at my local district attorney's office, getting involved with different student organizations, and also working with a group of previously incarcerated people, which is important to where we're going to get going. So when choosing my degree, I had the opportunity of going to some very high-ranking schools on full-ride scholarships. However, I slowly became aware that in those spaces, while there is great success, you are often leaving behind the people that truly do need help. It's a sort of climbing the ladder in order to dismantle the ladder, which is very conflicting, obviously. So in researching different schools, I discovered that San Jose State University really exemplified what I wanted out of my own career and what I wanted to support with my money, right? Because I'm paying for it. Mm-hmm. And the Justice Studies Department is very specifically called the Justice Studies Department and not Criminal Justice. Mm-hmm. So with that major, I believe one of the first titles was Penology before it shifted into the Administration of Justice. But it's important to look at the name there because it's a focus on law enforcement, how to work in law enforcement. So I'm trained in investigations, handling of evidence, procedure, all of that. But I don't want to be a police officer. I don't want anything to do with that. So when you're looking at San Jose State, they have changed their name many times over the years before landing on justice studies to really look at the sociological perspective and the way that society is really impacted by the criminal justice system. And I say that in quotes, as many people at San Jose State would, because it is not justice. And that is really the focus of what I would like to do with my career and going to law school and provide advocacy for others. And that is really what got me to where I am. However, during that time, there was another significant event that I purposely did not mention in the beginning because I didn't acknowledge it through all of this time. So when I was fresh out of that relationship, this is my first year of college, 2020 going into 2021, I had just gotten out and I decided, I had just turned 18 and I'm still young. I deserve to be loved. I deserve to, experience life. And I decided to go on a first date. Unfortunately, that, so perceived beginning of my healing journey was significantly detrimental. I was raped by a stranger that night, and because of where I had been with that previously abusive relationship, I just felt that it was meant to be. I logically knew that I did not deserve it, but a very important aspect of domestic violence or intimate partner violence is brain training. So beyond any physical or emotional, financial, sexual abuse, brain training is a really huge aspect of that. So you may not have any contact with your abuser for days, weeks, months, years, but that brain training remains. And so you will continue to victimize yourself through the person that hurt you. And this can be very impactful for many people, but especially if you do become diagnosed with PTSD, there can be much more significant effects. So looking at that now, I can see over my journey of how that really launched me into the criminal justice space. I like to think it's just because of Forensic Files, but that's really what got me here.
Okay. Well, thank you for having the courage to be vulnerable with us, because I shared with you before we got to being in this podcast episode together that I'm also a survivor of sexual violence, and it takes courage to share those things, especially with somebody who's essentially a total stranger. So thank you, and I hope that I make you feel safe here.
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say. Thank you for creating such a safe space. Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things or the topics that we came to talk about today was survivor advocacy. And so you shared a little bit that you were a survivor advocate. How long have you been one?
So survivor advocacy can look like a lot of different things. In the professional world, survivor advocacy is not the title that's going to be used. It's going to be victim advocacy. So if you yourself are looking for these sorts of services, such as if you were the victim of a violent crime or if you were a family member, and you need assistance going through the trial or court process, reach out to your local district attorney's office and ask for the Victim Advocacy Center, and that would be the person that you want to speak to. So victim advocacy versus survivor advocacy, that is really up to the person who, however they want to label it. In the world of criminology and victimology, there is a big change happening right now as to whether professionals want to use the term victim versus survivor. When you speak to a lot of people that have been on the receiving end of violence, it really depends on where they're at in their journey. I can say that I have very seldom used the word victim solely because of my own experiences, that I don't like a victim mentality. I don't like to say that everything has happened to me and, everything is wrong. Of course, there's been a significant amount of, traumatic things that I've endured, but at the same time, I am greater than all of that. What I have built with my life, one of my greatest points of pride is how I have reacted to my trauma. And I am a survivor of it. I'm not a victim of my experiences. So it really depends. However, there are some people who, can appreciate a survivor label, but really have a sense of identity within a victim title. And, there's no shame in that at all. While I don't personally identify with that, I can fully understand. You don't want anybody to take away those experiences from you. Of course, you don't want them to happen. But when people begin to deny the weight or reality of your experiences, that can become a very isolating thing. So again, survivor advocacy, it really can look like a lot of different things.
So what does being a survivor advocate or a victim advocate entail?
So again, this is going to be different for everybody. Let's start with people that have no idea where to start. So whether or not you have been a victim or survivor of violence doesn't necessarily affect where you can approach it. I like to think about any trauma. So, not everybody has experienced a significant trauma, but we've all experienced something in some form. So think back to that trauma and how you may have felt when it initially happened. Was it embarrassing? Did you feel perhaps a bit isolated, like other people wouldn't necessarily understand? Of course, when you are looking at other people, you cannot compare your experiences. And I don't recommend necessarily trying to share your experiences in a way that is overwhelming or putting someone else's experiences down. However, when you share your story, you are helping relieve some of those feelings that we just talked about. So a lot of people, it is valid to feel like nobody understands your experiences because all of our experiences are very unique. However, experiencing violence and a lot of the associated feelings with it that come, days, months, years afterwards, that is very much not unique. And understanding how ununique it is can lift a really large weight off of your shoulders. So that is a great way to start your advocacy journey, by being honest with other people. And by no means do you have to put everything out on the table, but by saying, I understand I may have had this experience or that experience. You don't have to, put everything out there, but really just the little things can help people feel a lot less alone. In addition to that, people who are struggling at least myself, I can identify with being, not wanting too much help, right? Like I can handle this. I have always been able to handle this. And, when things are hard, it can also be a trigger to reach out to people, especially if you've experienced multiple traumas. It can become the safest option to just rely on yourself. However, that form of self-preservation is acting through survival. That is only going to preserve your well-being or ability to maintain your health in the very moment. When you're looking at a bigger picture, there are extreme detrimental risks to consider there. Using myself as an example, I did not and have not reported my rape. That is my own personal choice, and I know that that is a choice that a lot of people share. Through that time, I have sought other resources and forms of support, such as therapy, but through that time, I still have maintained that I can be the only person to help me. It's what keeps me safe mentally. However, in doing that again, there are those long-term risks. So for myself, a few weeks ago, I was diagnosed with a stress-induced autoimmune disorder. This is very difficult to navigate because I can understand, looking at my own traumas, that I made some choices that I wouldn't have made now. But again, that's going back to your brain is acting through a need for survival. What you're doing, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. You have to do what you have to do to get through it. But please, my biggest tip of advice when it comes to self-advocacy, advocating for yourself, do not let yourself be alone. I really recommend trying to designate a certain safe person. I think that this is really important to mention for anybody that is feeling maybe unsure with their partner in a romantic relationship. However, it is also important to note that violence extends beyond romantic relationships. It could be with friends, coworkers, siblings. Any relationship is prone to violence. But having a safe person allows you to share your feelings and have somebody hold you consistent when you are not able to be consistent for yourself. And again, touching back on that brain training that I mentioned earlier, it has a long-standing effect that you cannot necessarily be conscious of. So when you think one day, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get a therapist, and I'm going to take these steps to be better, the next day, or even the same afternoon, all it takes is a quick chemical switch in your brain to say, wait, no, I need, that might bring up this, or that might bring up that. And I know for myself that going through this journey, I need to maintain my well-being in the moment in order to even make it to tomorrow. So it's more than understandable the need to be alone, but please reach out for a safe person that can hold you accountable on that next day when you wake up and you're like, oh no, I can't go to therapy. That person can remind you, hey, I know you're not feeling good this morning, but you know that the best thing for you in the moment and in the long term is to do this. And I also understand that not everybody has access to a safe person. In that case, there are many online free services available for therapy. I really, really, really recommend it. I have struggled with using that in the past, simply because of that self-reliance of it's self-preservation. I have to do everything myself. I have to get through this. Nobody else knows how to get through this. But I really encourage you, again, sometimes we're not able to fully take care of ourselves in the way that we need to. And, reach out for that safe person, build yourself a network. It is going to help you in the long run and in the short term, even if you can't realize it in the moment.
I like that idea of having a safe person. In one of our most recent episodes about knowing your surroundings, that was kind of a similar topic that we had, where it was mainly about, like, in terms of reporting folks missing for MMIP Awareness Month, that you should have ties outside of your immediate relationship with maybe your partner or somebody that you live with. So that way, if you do go missing and they don't report it, that another person, your safe person, your friend, your family member outside of that, that your home can help also.
Absolutely. That's really, really, really huge. As, a young woman that is living hundreds of miles away from all of my friends and families, I definitely have that set up for myself. There might be days that I go by without communicating with my mom. If my roommates were to not notice, who's going to report me missing?
Mm-hmm.
And to kind of touch on that a bit more, be weird, be rude, stay alive. I think that comes from crime junkies, to give them their props. I know, especially when we're looking at, historically impoverished communities, we're looking at a culture of protect each other, right? We're not reaching out to the police. We're not, it is a learned and valid behavior that is, again, another act of self-preservation. However, when it comes to missing people, especially in Indigenous communities, there's such a lack of, one, media coverage, and two, law enforcement taking them seriously. So it is more than being safe. You have to do, unfortunately, more than the average person does. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to build these networks, because there are 1,000 cracks within every system. And unfortunately, there's not necessarily anybody there to pull you out of them. And with missing people specifically, whether it is Indigenous communities or other Black and Brown communities, there is a very huge problem with media coverage, and missing white woman syndrome, which kind of covers on the media coverage as well, where you have a white woman go missing. Immediately, we're going to have the town looking for them. Law enforcement is concerned. We have them on local media. If, let's say 5 hours go by, we're going to have state coverage, right? We're going to have an alert out. We're going to have national coverage soon enough. Everybody's terrified and worried about their children. We're locking our doors extra more than normal. Well, what happens when an Indigenous person or someone from another community goes missing? We don't see that. There are seldom celebrated cases, and celebrated cases is a criminal justice term, meaning cases that just get a lot of attention. And so you can see some cases where Indigenous people will have mass coverage. However, those few outliers do not make up for the very significant lack of not only advocacy, but basic rights that Indigenous people need to have when it comes to missing, murdered people, especially with sexual violence, and talking about rural areas and reservations as well. There's a whole other jurisdiction of law enforcement that greatly delays timelines of finding missing people or finding people that are known to be unfortunately murdered, but they have not found their body yet. Mm-hmm. Everything, there's so many different boxes to check and different things that can be checked on jurisdiction on tribal lands, which is something that needs to be eliminated. Like many things that have been set up by the United States government, it was, quote, intended to help bridge gaps and, break boundaries to accessibility, right? That is why there's a tiered jurisdiction system. So, for example, if a non-Indigenous person commits a crime on Indigenous land, it's a whole different set of jurisdiction from an Indigenous person on a non-Indigenous person on Indigenous land versus pretty much every combination you can toss out there. There's different levels of jurisdiction that then have to be decided and argued by those different agencies. And it's usually not, no, this is my case. No, this is my case. It's no, that's your case. You take that. Mm-hmm. And so if we're looking at several days going by just arguing about jurisdiction alone, how are we properly advocating for and providing services to Indigenous communities in need, in great time-sensitive moments of need, like when people are missing? Mm-hmm. So because of those different issues outside of the average person's control, I would like to go to law school and become a legislative attorney to change these issues. That is why you need to be so diligent on self-advocacy, on building those support systems, because again, this set of government is not set up for everybody. The mm-hmm. forms of care that we have are not set up for everybody. thankfully, there are wonderful places like here, the Indian Health Center, that are working to bridge some of those gaps. But it really is up to yourself and your community to make sure that everybody is safe and okay. And one thing I wanted to add on to the last thing that I said is a significant difference in rural communities versus metropolitan areas when it comes to access to resources, especially with missing people. I come from a rural area, and I have done a lot of work and research when it comes to missing people, specifically with historically impoverished communities or communities that have faced a large amount of oppression in the United States. There is already, in any community that is in a rural area, a significant lack of resources. So really, really, if you are located in a rural area, please, there are extra steps that you need to take to advocate for yourself. Make yourself known with the local sheriff's department. When you are a minority living in a predominantly white area, that is something that needs to be done. This is not necessarily applicable to everyone, but in Alaska, that is a common practice for a lot of advocacy agencies will encourage that. Go make a relationship with your local law enforcement. If you are living in a town of 50,000 people, people know each other. You recognize faces. And on the dual side of that sword, when you're living in a small area, things go wrong, people are keeping their mouths shut. They are not going and necessarily looking out for everybody. They're protecting themselves. So again, you need to protect yourself to the best of your ability. Get your safe person. If you're unable to advocate for yourself, again, that safe person, it takes a village, right?
Yeah. Wow. Who else can be my safe person? I'm thinking, I was like, I have
coworkers are good because you have to think about different aspects of your life. Where I think about myself, and like my roommates and I are almost never home at the same time. There could be days that go by where they don't notice. I only work a certain amount of days during the week. Well, there could be a 4-day period where nobody sees me or hears from me, and that technically wouldn't be weird for me. So yeah, think about the different places that you occupy. Work, is it school? Have a classmate say like, hey, something ever happens, like, do you mind checking in with me or something like that? It might be weird. That's okay.
Be weird.
Yeah, be weird. I also am a really big advocate for going up to strangers in different capacities. One, if someone looks like they're having a bad day, why not go up to them and say, how are you doing? That is another form of survivor advocacy I didn't touch on. Especially studying criminal justice, it's almost guaranteed that I'm talking about rape or watching something violent in class every single day. There are times where I've had to remove myself from the class or take a break, or I am someone that uses my hands a lot as a form of like coping. And so I'll often like massage my hands, but I've noticed a few times over the last few months where I've like been digging my nails into my hand. And there are things that you may not notice, but hey, if I'm sitting in class and I'm noticing this girl, we're watching this movie, she's digging her nails into her hand, it might make a significant difference to her to go, hey, are you doing okay? Or him, hey, are you doing okay? You see someone crying down the street, maybe they just lost their phone. And still, saying, hey, are you okay? Doesn't hurt. But maybe, they need that extra person. They don't have their safe person, or they're not able to advocate for themselves. Those little interactions are very significant. In addition to that, if you see somebody in danger, or you think you see somebody in danger, be annoying. Call 911. Call a non-emergency line. I cannot express how much the bystander effect is so extremely dangerous. Do not be afraid to be weird, be a snitch. Save someone's life. Be the person to be extra observant and annoying. Annoy the dispatcher. Go for it. Don't waste anybody's time or precious resources. But if it is a valid concern, it's a valid concern. So absolutely, that's another really important form of, survivor advocacy or preventing crime from happening.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you touched on the bystander effect. I've experienced that firsthand. I was taking the public transportation system, VTA, here in San Jose, which is normally, it's fine, and like it gets you from point A to point B. The drivers are really respectful. I never had an issue with the driver. It was folks waiting at the bus stop who I had an issue with. I was just sitting down, and normally I'm like you, where I like to go talk to strangers and like, hi, how long have you been waiting for the bus? Just letting her know I'm here. And like, it also helps me gauge for my personal safety if they're going to be extra weird or like non-avoidant. Yeah. And so I sat down, and there's already one person on my left and there's one person far to my right. The one on the far right has red cheeks. She just looks like she's not having a great day. And I was like, she looks a little mad. I'm going to give her space, just reading the room. And then the person on my left, I'm like, hey, how long have you been waiting here? Who's like, oh, like maybe 5 minutes. Like, it hasn't come yet, but it should be here soon. I'm like, okay, cool. So I'm looking for the bus. I'm looking to my left, and out of nowhere, I could feel it now, I got hit in the face with a really big bag. The lady on my far right had a schizophrenic episode where she thought I was following her. And she accused my father of working at a local Dairy Queen or something. And I was like, my dad's a police officer in a whole other city. What? And then it just didn't make any sense to me. I was like, why are you hitting me? And so she's yelling at me. She hit me. I fell backwards. I'm on my back now. I'm on the sidewalk. I'm just like, what is happening? What is even my life? And she's an older woman, too. So I also was like, I'm not going to hit an old woman. That's rude. I was raised to respect my elders, not beat them, even if they're hitting me. Like, I could already tell that she was not mentally all there. But I'm still being attacked, and I'm trying to defend myself by just sticking my arm out, and I'm asking for help. And in the midst of me asking for help, I'm downtown San Jose. I'm on 1st Street and East Santa Clara, busy part of the city. I think I was there at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. Yeah. And there was people walking by, and I'm asking people, like, help. And I didn't have my phone. That was the whole reason I was even on that bus stop, was so I could go back to the YMCA so I could pick up my phone. And I was like, I could have just avoided this had I remembered to have my phone. And I asked for help. I'm like, help, somebody, please help me. This woman's going crazy. And they looked at me like, oh, I don't want to be in this drama. And they just kept walking. And there's people like actually on their phones and still walking away. And I'm like, okay. And then I was like, I need some other help. So instead I was just like, ayúdame, like loud. And this big Hispanic man came to my rescue, my little Superman. And he was just like, what happened? I was like, I don't know, she's crazy. And she's hitting me. And he understood English, thank goodness, too. And so, because I speak Spanglish, it's not very fluent. And anyways, he was able to be my little person in between, stuck a hand out to the lady's chest so he could keep her away.
And shout out to him. That is exactly what we need. It very much enraged me as you were telling your story, and that all of those people around.
Yeah.
Not growing up in a city, that's not something I'm very familiar with. Growing up in a rural area, although it is a little different in some other ways, people help each other. And that is something that's how I was raised. And in the Hawaiian culture, it is a whole other level of it. It does not matter. You're helping anyone for any reason at any time. Mm-hmm. So it is absolutely bizarre, frustrating, frightening, all of the above to see the way that people interact with their community here. It's very isolating, and it makes me scared to go out because of that exact reason. So please, when you are out, step up, stand out. Don't be afraid to help people. And if you don't mind, I'd like to use your story as a little bit of a transition to something else that I thought about. And that is the dual role of victim versus offender. So as you mentioned, that woman, you perceived her to be struggling with a form of mental illness. She was not doing too well herself. Again, that does not excuse or validate her actions of hurting you or harming you or anyone in any way. But it is a great example of looking at, can somebody be both a survivor and an offender, or, someone who has experienced abuse and then perpetuates abuse. Just because, you make a poor choice doesn't mean that it voids your status as a victim. Neither if you are someone that commits crime and something terrible happens to you, that doesn't mean that you are not a victim either. And that is a hard concept for a lot of people to interact with, and very understandably so. As someone who has experienced several forms of violent crime, I can really appreciate the way that it is very difficult for some people. But as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the work that I've done is with currently and previously incarcerated people. So there's a really interesting program at San Quentin Prison that I'd like to mention called Vogue. And so it involves taking, at San Quentin, it's with men, so a group of men who have committed a certain type of crime. So for example, let's say they all committed murder. You would then have a surrogate victim come in. So with murder specifically, it's not going to be the victim, it would be a victim's family member, would come in. And again, it's not going to be the exact person who committed the crime versus who was on the receiving end. It's going to be random people. So we're not, creating any harmful spaces for anybody. But it then allows them to assess each sides of the relationship. How did my choices impact you? Why did I make these choices? And in working in those groups and other sorts of programs, you start to understand and look through that trauma-informed lens of, we're all hurting. We are all hurting, and it does not validate when you go and hurt other people. However, it is really important for your inward and outward healing journey. For myself, I've worked with several rapists, several convicted sex offenders, and it's been an evolution. I remember the very first time I worked with a top of the tier sex offender, and I was like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. Okay. And I went into it, with the least amount of judgment or bias I could. Unfortunately, with that specific gentleman, and I can thankfully say it's the only time something has ever gone wrong, he did end up having some unfortunate behaviors that were not appropriate in our professional setting. But you start to work with these people and you understand that most of the time they are not hurting people because they want to hurt people. And sometimes they do. And that's a choice as well. But understanding in my own journey, well, I know I didn't logically deserve to be abused, but I still made the choice to stay. It takes a person on average 7 times to leave an abusive relationship. I stayed. I knew he was engaging in poor behaviors, and I stayed. Well, is that my fault? Does that make me deserving of abuse? No, it doesn't. Did I make poor choices during that time as well? Yes. Does that mean that I did not experience that abuse? No. So understanding the duality and that it's also not simply 1 and 2 is very important. So re-examining yourself and other people, and also forgiving. It does not mean that you have to personally forgive the person who hurt you. I am not there in my own journey, and I don't plan on doing it anytime soon. But it has been extremely healing to work with other people who have made similar choices, and seeing the way that, one, that they have made different choices, that they have evolved, and 2, understanding where they're coming from. So I think that can be really significant as well. And also to looking at people differently, the people that hurt you or the people that hurt other people, we're all hurting.
Mm-hmm. What are some things that survivors can do for support?
So really everything that I've mentioned is a really great start. In terms of resources in Santa Clara County, because I've not been here that long, I don't have too many to recommend. There is a Santa Clara County chapter of the YWCA. I don't off the top of my head remember what the acronym stands for, but they are a rape crisis center. They serve in many other agencies similar to this. There's usually one in every community that is called either a rape crisis center or a women's shelter. They're a middleman to provide a plethora of services. So I actually got referred to them by San Jose State University. When I had called the wellness center, I was trying to get connected with a therapist. Their sexual violence focused therapist had left, and so they had just left like a voicemail that forwarded you to YWCA, which was not the best way to get introduced to them, because it was a little bit of a jarring shock when they answered and were like, "Rape crisis center." But they do offer a lot of services. So if you are looking for therapy, if you are unsure of maybe what you're experiencing, that also, to toss that out there, if you're ever wondering what's happening to you, you're curious if something is terrible, reach out. Chances are it is. And also, if your friends and family are telling you that someone doesn't belong in your life, you should listen to them. But those services are very great. They can help connect you with other services you need. They also provide some in-house services as well. For our Indigenous community, the MMIW website is great. They're also another sort of middleman for providing other resources. If you go to their website and go into the resources tab, they do have several services listed. If you are a college student, I do definitely recommend getting in touch with your local health center or wellness center. They do often have a large amount of free services available. And also checking in with Santa Clara County, they do offer several free services or cash aid for services as well. I understand that these are not accessible to everybody, but it is a place to start. I've also really struggled with the juggle of systems and places and resources. No one is alone in that. But unfortunately, it really does boil down to self-advocacy, which is great and unfortunate at the same time.
Yeah, I, again, as a survivor of SA, sexual assault, when I had moved to San Jose, that was one of the first things that I was looking for was, okay, I'm in this new area. I still have this trauma. I need to work through it. And I was trying to get in touch with somebody. So what I did first was I think I did call the YWCA, and I asked them, like, do you know if anyone has any, like, sexual assault survivor groups or support groups, anything like that. And at that time, because this is in 2014, where I was more interested in, like, healing that aspect of my life, again, it was like the jarring of, like, being moved around and, like, oh, maybe this is the right number, or call this person at this time. And I'm like, okay. So it took me a little while. And what I eventually settled on doing for myself was just going to, like, therapy in general. And I did not find success in finding a group. But I just want, like you were saying, that, now it's 2024, and hopefully more of these resources are being readily available. And then I think the other part is, the people that I was speaking to, they also didn't seem like the right person to answer that type of call. So it's not always just like you, and there's nothing wrong with you as a person seeking that help for yourself. It might be the person who answers the call might be a new employee, and maybe they don't know exactly how to get you in touch with that. But that doesn't mean to stop looking, and find what works best for you, whether it's a group or individual therapy. Whatever gets you there gets you there.
Yes, and please don't give up. I am actively struggling with this as well, being in a new area, and it is very hard. It's tiring. And if there is anything I can offer, it's that you are not alone. This is extremely common. And last but not least, this is not available for everybody, but talk to your family. It took me several years to talk to mine. But the very moment I did, it was just a huge weight just lifted off of me instantly. And again, it speaks to that sharing your story with strangers, allowing other people to have that safe space to share theirs. With sexual violence or domestic violence, intimate partner violence, there is so much stigma, and ending it is, again, another huge weight. A lot of the struggles that survivors endure is just living every day, really. I think that support groups can be awesome, and there are so many resources they fit different people. But above all, it really comes down to, how do I get through this day? How do I get through the next one? Therapy is great. And if you can't find a therapist, don't give up. Please do not give up. I am also still looking for a therapist. It takes a really long time, especially if you're in an area where there's a really high population density. But again, like, my safe people have been what have been able to get me through. And like you said, unfortunately, there are some people that, one, you might catch them on a bad day, or two, they're there for the money. They're not necessarily there to advocate for you, unfortunately. And I get very tired of that. But if there's one thing you can hold on to, it is that you are deserving of all of this. So when you want to give up, you're struggling of, however many months, maybe it's been years you've been trying to find a therapist. That's applicable to me. I'm a serial 1-session therapist girl. Like, we do one therapist session and I don't like them, or they don't like me. And it's just, you got to keep going, and that's very tiring. But just remember, I know I am deserving of healing and of safety, especially when you experience multiple traumas. For me personally, it's super confusing. I get out of one thing and here's another thing, and next thing. It can really mess with your brain and make you feel like you deserve it, but you absolutely do not. And that is my favorite thing to remind other people with complex trauma, is that this is not the universe's plan. This is not something you are deserving of. I am a believer in that everything happens for a reason, but not because you're supposed to suffer. It is the launch pad to get you where you need to be. Like I mentioned earlier, the way that I've reacted to my trauma is one of my greatest pride points. And I am in a spot where I'm taking things slower and I'm not, trying to tackle everything at once, but you just have to go with what works best for you.
Yeah. And I like that too, where you were saying that, folks shouldn't, I guess, what's the best way to word this? Like, one of the things I shared with folks when I was in a support group, and I realized that support groups are not for me, because I was in one where it was like trauma Olympics, where they're like, oh, well, this happened to me. And this. I felt like people were trying to top each other, and that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to heal, not to share my trauma like it's a pride point for me, because it's not. And so in that group setting, I shared with them that, like, I felt, because I've, like you said, multiple traumas, that I had like a sign on my forehead that just said, potential victim, get her, you know? And while that may sound a little funny, it at that time, it didn't feel funny, and it felt like a reality.
Absolutely.
Because, again, of the multiple instances of sexual assault and violence. And I'm like, wow, just because this has happened to me in one aspect, what are the odds that this happens to the same person twice? And I actually learned that the instance and the statistics are higher than I would have liked to imagine, and that I wasn't alone in that. But I kind of wanted to be alone in that, because I don't want anyone else to have to be victimized twice. And so that was just really interesting to learn, and a part of my own healing journey. Again, that you were saying that it's not our fault that anything has happened to us, and doesn't mean that we're deserving of that type of interaction, and that we all have our own journeys to heal from it. IHC is a part of a community-wide response and action with collaborators throughout the South Bay and beyond. To learn more about the MMIP movement and local happenings in the area, you can visit the Indian Health Center's MMIP page at the link above. You can also email us directly if you have any questions or concerns at marketing@ihc.org. Thank you.
Thank you.